Hi everyone, this is a new episode of Gold as Girls. My name is Carla van Walsen and today we have an amazing guest, my friend, Dr. Racelle Weiman. And Racelle is a scholar in Holocaust studies in a very special way, and I would like you to explain a little bit right away what that means.
Carla, it's such a pleasure to know you and to have the opportunity not only to call you a friend, but also to see that we're on the same quest. Because I think that in the field of psychology, in the field of human relations, and the concept of where does somebody, not where you're from, but also where you're going, is very important.
Yeah.
And I think we overlap in a lot of the things that we're interested in, both in the personal, individual way, but also in a global way. Yeah. My field, many people right away say, oh, you're a historian. And of course, history had to be a very heavy part of my learning and my preparation for the work I do. Mm-hmm. But people might call me, when I used to be I used to tease them in a sense, when they'd introduce me on international stages and say, here's the famous Holocaust scholar Racelle Weiman, and I get up and I say, I'm sorry, I am not a Holocaust scholar. And they sort of look around, boy, did they invite the wrong person. Wait a minute, is there another Racelle? I said, no, I'm an anti-Holocaust scholar. I've spent my entire career on how to prevent Holocaust and genocide, where Holocaust could not have happened and would not have happened, and where it didn't happen. I focused on those who resisted. I focused on those who spoke out. I focused not on where it went wrong, but where there was the possibility, if not the actuality, of stopping it.
That's very interesting.
So the behavior that I'm sure you think about on not a micro level, but on the individual level, I think about it as a social anthropological event.
Yeah.
How do groups, whole countries, say no to Hitler? Which many people have heard about the Danish no to Hitler. Nobody knew about the Bulgarian no to Hitler.
No. 60,000
Jews were saved in Bulgaria.
That's so true. When you told me that one time I started to talk about it, nobody knew.
And often I come up with, and many times people will say, well, the story was that there were 1,200 people saved in the Philippines by the Philippines president during the Holocaust, more than those that were saved by Oskar Schindler, which people know that name.
Yeah.
And people say, and the people, one of the one of those Malinaners, I call them, one of those Holocaust survivors, a child survivor, who was saved directly by the President Quezon, told his story at some point after he retired from engineering in Washington, D.C., and he went to volunteer at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and people saw his age, and they said, oh, what's your story? And he said, I was rescued in the Philippines. And scholars would actually say, no, you weren't. And he said, what do you mean, no, I wasn't? I said, because nobody's ever written about it. Nobody's ever told that story. We don't know about it. Where's the documents if there's no documents? So as a survivor, he first wrote his story, interviewed all the people, and eventually I was part of also that initiative to recognize the Filipino rescue of more than 1,200 Jews, and a pushback that included Eisenhower being involved, which may or may not have influenced him on his path. There's many places where I hunt for, it's not just about righteousness. It was about people making strategic decisions at certain times that were moral, ethical, and based on critical thinking.
Well, yeah. So independent thinking.
Exactly,
yeah,
right.
Perfect.
Because most of what Holocaust that happen are groupthink, are influenced by fear, by smallness, by competitiveness, by zero-sum sharing. It's by, if these immigrants come in, or if the Jews are here, or whatever is being said, these people will take from me, or take from what I have, and therefore it's me or them. It's you or me mentality that creates the anti-Semitism and the hatred that is always around. And
also wrong information. I mean, unfortunately, there are so many blood libels and horrific ideas about Jews still circulating, even more than ever probably. and that doesn't help. Racelle, how did you make the choice to do what you do? What's your personal history in this?
Well, many people assume that people my age, I was born 10 years after the Holocaust was over, after the war was over. Yeah. I don't believe the Holocaust ended in 1945.
No.
It ended actually in 1948 when there was a state of Israel. It ended when Jews were able to be free people in their own land or have access to it, because there continued to be killing and murders all throughout Poland and other places. Of course, there were more pogroms all throughout. But the Holocaust is not officially over until there was the so-called illegal immigration, until it was legalized that Jews can find their own place in their own homeland in the state of Israel. That is the official date that I use, 1948, and May 14th.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that there hasn't been an incredible amount of anti-Semitism and pogroms and other things, but I would say the chapter that started in 1933 with the election and the sanctioned election by Hitler and the immediate opening up of Dachau and other concentration camps, mostly for political opponents, which include Jews and non-Jews, but in other words, wipe out resistance, wipe out voices, freedom of speech. Yeah. And immediately the acceptance of concentration camps in their midst began, and concentration camps are not death camps. These very different kinds of forms, and it was a step-by-step approach to getting the acquiescence and the acceptance of the rest of the populations. This is the most important thing. They didn't go all the way in. They kept doing step by step and kept looking like like a kid stealing something from a cookie jar. Can we get away with this? Can we get away with this? What will the country say? What will the church say? What will the opposition say? What will Britain say? What will America say? And when they said nothing, or even in many cases applauded the actions of the Nazi government, and got the full-fledged support of most of their citizenry, they were able to say, hey, we can do this. We're allowed. It seems to be that something that sounds unacceptable and impossible is now possible. And Holocaust historians are the most famous, Jutta Bauer, who just died this past year, would say that the impossible may become possible, but once it is now a reality, it means that it can continue to be a reality and people accept it as, if not normative, acceptable human action. Because it's been done, tried, worked, from the point of view of those who perpetrated. Now, you asked me a question about myself. It's odd that somebody like me would be involved, because I didn't have family that survived the Holocaust. They were all American-based. My father was an American soldier and volunteered and went over to
liberate, right?
Ultimately a liberator, but this word liberator even, and he also said so, that liberation is a kind of, we throw it around, but by and large the Nazis had left and the gates were hanging on their hinges, and the liberation was not as joyful as many people make it out to be, because the British and the Americans came much later, and the Russians sat for several months outside of Auschwitz when it could have come in and liberated the camp much earlier. And
that I didn't know.
Yes.
The Russians were sitting outside and didn't do anything. Why not?
That's a different, you and I would go down a different road.
Yeah, but it is so intriguing.
It's intriguing because it means that once just what we said, what wasn't possible is now possible. Now you have the situation that if I actually walk in, I have to acknowledge what happened. And they hadn't caught up the propaganda machine, the acceptability. And it also wasn't, and this is what the British, the Americans, and the Russians all decided, it wasn't a military target. It was not part of the military target to liberate camps, to help the cilians involved.
And then probably thinking most of them are Jews, so who cares?
That would be a great correct understatement.
Also from Russian perspective, I mean,
how
many Jews have they murdered over time?
And the greatest losses, of course, of the 55 million killed in World War II across the globe, 20 million were Russians, and many of them by their own government.
Yeah.
So you know, this who's the good guys in this whole story? There's very few that we can really say that are, we call Chachme Pesha, are totally innocents.
Yeah.
Many leaders, many organizations made strategic decisions that never thought about the victims or the potential victims. The idea of rescue was in the minds of very few. So I decided to spend, as I said, we got off course, but as a daughter of an American soldier and a Jew who raised proudly in America and active in the civil rights movement and other such things, I was a very proud Jew, am a very proud Jew. Think of it as the first order of my identity. I would probably even say before being a woman. I would almost say that if I had to do a hierarchy, even grandmother, I would say I'm primarily a Jew. And I say this in every way because my identity comes out of that. The way I'm a grandmother, the way I'm a woman, the way that I live my life, the way I'm an American comes because of the way that I have grounded myself in my Judaism and my Jewish identity. In saying that, though I met and had an incredible amount of wonderful courses in Holocaust literature and Holocaust history and other such things, I didn't focus on Holocaust. I actually was focusing on the history of Zionism. That was much more interesting to me. And when I went over to, and I felt as a proud Jew, I happened to be in Israel. I spent a year gap. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. And it happened to be the year 1973. And I was in Israel during the
Yom
Kippur War. And I did not come back to America, to my parents and family. I stayed for a full year and said I can be in Israel. I'm an American Jew, but I can be in Israel through wonderful peace, and I can do it through war. And this is a place I want to live. And I went back to America, finished my undergraduate in Jewish studies, and came back to Jerusalem. I thought Rak Yerushalayim, only Jerusalem, but ultimately wound up in Haifa, which was Haifa was a incredibly wonderful choice for me for the values that I had and the way that I lived my life. But it was job-based. And in the Jewish studies major, when I made Aliyah to Israel, I should say, immediately after the Entebbe affair.
Oh, yeah.
1976. I had just graduated that summer from UCLA, my undergraduate work. And everybody was watching the 200th anniversary of the bicentennial for the United States, and all the fireworks, all that. 1976 Entebbe, everyone was watching the bicentennial and the United States, and I was only watching what was going to happen to the Jews that were Israelis and Jews that were hostages
separated
and hostages on July 4th, 1976. Israel Air Force did an incredible rescue of the Jews and Israelis from Entebbe in Uganda, and the one and only soldier that was killed was in fact Yoni Netanyahu, who in fact one of my sons was named after him.
Oh,
and
honestly, one of your sons is, what do you say? One of your sons is yeah. I remember. It was the first name I wanted to choose for my daughter. She would have been a boy, but she wasn't.
So I made Aliyah. I moved to Israel, and I got in a very interesting job with high schoolers, and I was only 3 or 4 years older than them. And I was, how many years older than that? 4 or 5. They were getting prepared for army duty, and the work that I was working on, a special Machon Lechinuch Yehudi Tzioni, it's called Militz, the Institute for Holocaust, forgive me, the Institute for Jewish and Zionist Studies, it was called. And the idea was to do preparatory 3-day seminars for Israeli youth, because at that time, 1975, Arafat went to the UN and declared then, and they're hearing this resounding years later, Zionism is racism.
75, I still remember when I read it in the newspaper, and I felt instinctively this is going to create so many problems. And see that, because I was going back to what you said before, that you studied the history of Zionism, and of course we have two ways. The religious one, 2,000 years, next year we'll be hopefully back in Jerusalem, and the other one is the national, like we need to have an own home because people will always want to kill us, as was proven by 2,000 years of history. And the history, and yeah. So
I just wanted to add on to your, there is a modern understanding, and Ahad Ha'am was my mentor, not mentor, but in my philosophical
Ahad Ha'am means one people, right?
Yes. Yeah. And his view was not that we need a place because Jews need a shelter, a refuge. We need a place so that we can be authentically ourselves.
Yeah.
That we can have the resurrection of our language,
yeah.
of our culture, that we can be not always be dependent and on other cultures.
Yeah.
There's the terminology of a parasite, that this is a foreign group that's on top of another group. I call it an epiphyte. Epiphytes are these wonderful flowers like orchids that can be on top of a tree and grow beautifully, right? That the Jewish diaspora has been all around the world and has contributed greatly to the local, added to it, created it, used it, modified it, but have been incredible assets to each and every country that they occupied, that they were able to live in and be guests in. But we were always guests, we were always outsiders, and we needed a place to be authentically ourselves. So I don't look at it only as a refuge. I think it also is a refuge, but I certainly, as an American Jew in 1976, didn't need a refuge. What I needed was a place to be authentically me.
Yes, for sure.
And that includes a understanding of Jewish art and culture, and not as always dependent on and always by permission of the host or the general or the majority population. Someplace, somewhere, the Jews have to be a majority.
Yeah, that identity is, I think, very important, because it is everyone's experience, whether it be in the Muslim countries, European countries, wherever in the world. There is you are a different person. You are, they potentially think, are you a Jewish American or American Jew? Are you loyal to your country or loyal to your own people, or own tribe? That loyalty, I've heard that a lot too. Well,
I think that we can be loyal, or we can
Absolutely.
be to many different identities.
Absolutely.
As women, as people who believe a certain ideology of any sort, we can have many multiple identities and many multiple loyalties, but most of the world doesn't think that way.
True.
And at some point, people want a hierarchy, and I actually started this conversation about a hierarchy, that my identity is fully immersed in being a Jew, and therefore how do you act out Jewishly? How do you have Jewish time? Where is there any other country that functions on the Jewish calendar, where everyone on Friday is preparing for Shabbat, whether or not you're going to have a religious service or even light candles, but you're buying your challah, you're buying your flowers, you're preparing for the weekend, you're preparing for the family being home, and the first day, Sunday, is regular school and all those days. Where else can we all celebrate Shabbat in our own ways? With however we, in the long spectrum of being Jewish in many and different ways. Where else can we enjoy the holidays of Purim? I'm not talking about Pesach and Rosh Hashanah, but Purim and Tu B'Shvat and Hanukkah, authentic Hanukkah, not a Hanukkah that is a kind of a pushback to Christmas and competitive in any way.
Which is Hanukkah bush and the gifts and oh my God,
where is it that each and every wonderful holiday, where for the first time you can celebrate things like that are special in the history of our people, that would be like Lag Bomer, and definitely Shavuot. Shavuot always gets shoved under unless you're an Orthodox Jew in the diaspora.
Is phenomenal.
Shavuot is a wonderful holiday, and it's rarely celebrated in a way that we can, in fact, fully glorify in the not only receiving of the commandments and in the springtime and in everything that happens from being slaves in Egypt to ultimately having choices and liberation at the bottom of Mount Sinai. I think it's wonderful. And I think, and I'm not diverting from the topic of why Holocaust studies. What I went into understanding was I saw that Holocaust was an incredible impediment to many people, many Jews. I found that even when I was working with high school children, teenagers, they were not children.
Yeah,
let me go back. Okay, I found that when I was working with high school students that are only a year away from girls and boys going into the Israeli army, they were tripped up in the 1970s, born generation after the Holocaust, with the Holocaust being looming shadow over what does it mean to be Jewish. They knew what it meant to be Israeli now, but they didn't really understand what it meant to be Jewish in a global setting. Their connection to me, unless I became one of them, which is citizenship, etc., which I did. But what is their connection to Jews and Judaism? Because what was the connection of God to the Jews? In what way made us a peoplehood? How do we understand that? Which is really what global Zionism is. And understanding not just that there has to be and should be a state of Israel in the land of Israel, for perpetuity, like every nation alongside other nations. Really simple. But from the Jewish perspective, where is that identity and belonging and connectedness that's so important? And right away, they said something very interesting to me, and this is where it becomes the difference, the switch. Not why did the Nazis do this? And they didn't ask questions like, how did it happen? They would say things like, we are brogus with God.
What is brogus?
What is brogus?
For the people that don't know.
Yeah. What is brogus? Brogus is a credible, I don't think we have it in English. It means that I'm so mad at you, I'm not talking to you.
Oh yeah.
People that walk away. I don't know. And it doesn't mean that you don't exist. In fact, very much. You exist and you're important. You matter.
We ignore you.
You matter. Yeah. But I can't get over my anger or my disappointment or whatever it is that I expected of our relationship. I'm so mad at you that I don't want to talk to you. So it doesn't deny God's existence. It's asking God, why do we need you? If you don't value me, how can I value you?
And wow, they spoke all like that, because I know those discussions too, of course. And for me, it is like, well, people did it. Who says that God can and could interfere in the way that we think,
Well, I took a different approach than what you just said.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I immediately, again, I'm young and foolish and American and
Why foolish?
Well, foolish. I mean, how much do you know when you're 21 or 22?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Right? And I immediately responded to these Israeli kids, these Jewish kids in 1977, 78, when I started this conversation with them. I don't understand why you have a problem with God. The people who should have a problem with God are the Christians. They did it. They followed it. They went down a road to murder children. They went down the road to build death camps and design a Zyklon B. They did this. What kind of relationship did they have to God? They're the ones who are worshiping an evil God. If whatever we might want to talk about, God standing next to us, standing in the gas chambers with us, weeping, impotent or potent or whatever his expectations were, God is God of all the universe, including all of mankind, not just the Jews.
Yeah.
God is God of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
How does God feel about his Christian children?
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who did it.
Non-Christian children, a lot of people were not religious at all.
Just not being religious doesn't make you non-Christian. They still were card-carrying Christians. They still came out of the mindset of the Christian church. I think that in so many ways,
that's true.
We can be, whether or not somebody goes religiously to a religious institution, until you ultimately say, I'm not of you, until whatever you're doing is not of you, then you're in. You're in if you don't immediately take yourself out. And that you go to, if you're going to celebrate Christmas, you're going to celebrate Easter, you're Christian. You're going to celebrate, if you're going to go take a Christian marriage, you're Christian. If you're going to baptize your kids, you're Christian.
Then you are.
You may be,
yeah.
But most of them were. In 1940 they were. In 1933 they were. Yeah. Most of them were. They went through the motions without questioning. I'm talking about critical thinking now.
Yeah.
I'm preparing the ground for what does critical thinking mean.
Yeah.
You're just like you're following the political parties and ultimately the military of the German army. You are following the Christian church of the Protestant and Catholic churches. And in both, and then it continued if it was in Hungary, and it happened if it was in Romania and other places. By and large, it was Christians who did it, and it was by and large a Christian experience. Christian Europe did this, and Christian Europe thought it was, in some way, even an advanced version of what they've been taught for 2,000 years. So the same 2,000 years that we've overlapped by our diaspora, we have by and large those that lived in the Muslim world, those who lived in the predominantly Muslim worlds and Christian worlds. Very few lived in other places, but it was that this general others that came out of and competed for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is where it becomes very, very fraught. Yeah. And I wanted to study interreligious relations based on how do we handle the Holocaust. Both Jews and Christians, and then later on the Muslims too involved. Well, both where they said yes and where they said no. Where were the imams and the priests and the pastors? But my gut reaction, this is what's so interesting, they were blown away. We never thought that God is in terrible crisis, not by what's happening to the Jews, but by the fact that other members of other human beings, mankind, has fell in such disrepair, and God is weeping over them too. Yeah. What did they do? What did they not understand about a relationship? And if you have an idea, whether it's a centrality of God or centrality of goodness, or however you want to think about our relationship with something larger than ourselves, we have to think about everybody.
That is so true. So in addition to this, my thought comes up, if that's okay, that the Mufti of Jerusalem, who in 1940 didn't like at all that Jews were coming, and they pushed so badly the British there in the British mandate to close the borders, which could have saved many European Jews if they wouldn't have done that. What do you know about that? What do you think about that? The Mufti of Jerusalem went to connect with Hitler, and there is a saying now today from the evidence they have that he accomplished, that he was pushing very much the agenda of the Endlösung, the murder of all the Jews, because he wanted to have the mandate of Palestine. He didn't want to have the Jews there, and that he impacted that. What do you think about that?
That's not what I think. That's the truth.
Yeah, I know, but what do you think? No, what do you think about that? Because nobody spoke about that years ago. Is it something that came up lately?
Because who's doing it? Every time in the world that we know about, people speak, it's not in mainstream knowledge. Part of the job of scholars is to not just sit in the libraries and write books that nobody reads. Yeah. Part of it is the second half is to be the teachers and disseminators of information that's important for us to know. Yeah. For us to know how to act in the future. Where should future people act? Where should so the study in languages, many things, it's interesting. If you sit in America in particular, if it wasn't written in English, it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Okay. I mean, the story of the Bulgarian Jews was written about, but never in English, so the Americans didn't know about it.
Not in Dutch either.
Okay, all right. So for whatever reason, if that's not in the languages that people commonly speak, and then I'm not even saying reporters, I'm talking about if something comes into the language, if something doesn't come into, this is part of the social anthropology that's so important to study, not just the Holocaust that happened historically, when it happened, where it happened, to whom it happened, who was involved. But what are the lessons we learned from it? Yeah. What are the things that are most important that we should understand so that we see how did people respond? Who were those who contributed to the mass murder of the Jewish people in Europe during that time? And let open doors for more murder and more genocide and more things to happen across the world, but also acceptable behavior. And where has there been important information or knowledge we know so it doesn't happen again? I focus on not the void, and not the, sort of like, I read somewhere in a beautiful way that one of the most wonderful ways to read a book is the spaces in between the words. Where
like
you
the
pause.
music.
Exactly, like the music. Explain to me how it's so important in music. Tell me.
It's the tension. It is the thought. It's amazing. It's the tension that brings you to the next. Yeah. And it's what your thought do too. You play to the next.
All right?
Yeah.
And that's where, in fact, it shows a good or a great concertmaster.
Yeah.
A good or great conductor.
Yeah.
Knows how to use the
Yeah,
pauses.
but the instrumentalist too. It is in your mind.
Yes.
You can hear if somebody plays a stuff, when somebody plays a piece mechanically, or with the whole intensity, intentions, and that whole line.
So we don't use that, and we don't apply that to the scholar, to the person who is taking not just information, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
We discover things, and we have to learn the tension that's in between, and what's not said, and what's not yet there, and why it's not there. For when you look for the voids, when somebody says, "Why didn't somebody react?" Or then you look for it. Where's the reaction, and what made it less than it should have been? Because even if we now say, and we've been looking and hunting and people coming forward with the numbers of righteous Gentiles, non-Jews who saved Jews during the Holocaust. And first of all, how much do we really, really care about that? How do we really care about that? Because when I ask people who are quite knowledgeable about that time period, how many righteous Gentiles' names can you give forward? I'm shocked every time that they can't even name 5. Can't even name 5.
Yeah.
And there's more than 50,000 that we've named. 50,000 individuals and experiences that we can name that have real names attached, because every one of them had to be filtered through the Righteous Gentile Department at Yad Vashem, and a real survivor had to come forward to nominate them, and they had to do the research. And there's close to 50,000 names of instances of non-Jews who saved Jews, and in fact, 50,000 people were, if not rescued, were served by seeing the goodness of mankind at that time. Yeah. And we can't name them. Yeah. We can name 5, many people can name 5 Nazis just like that. So we don't put that as a value. We don't look at that as being an important value. Each time a new name comes forward, I try to, if not remember the instance, so I can remember Ferdinand Deckwitz from the Danish rescue. Ferdinand Deckwitz was a German who was able to pass the information to the Danish resistance. It's not just the regular ones, even these marvelous people like Miep, who helped save who was feeding Anne Frank's family in Holland, or like we know the story of Oskar Schindler, as people throw that out. But they always have to then say, whoever it is, like Emmanuel Quezon from Philippines, Oskar Schindler of Philippines. No, you don't have to say the Oskar. There's nothing to do with them. They never knew anything about each other. They behaved totally different. The one good thing they did was they both were saving Jews. Yeah. And I just found out a whole Swedish group that helped get the information of the Jews out just this week. There were a group of 5 Swedish fellows who worked for the Polish electric company, and still had some kind of contract as Sweden to work for the Polish electric company during the Holocaust. They're the ones who snuck out the information of the death camps to Britain in 1942. A group of Swedes. I never heard of his name before. His name is Norman, if I'm not right. I'll have to remember that.
I cannot help you. I'm sorry. I don't know.
You will if you come with me to the movie next week.
Oh, okay.
Because I just saw the movie about him. And it was just a side thing. And the movie didn't say it, by the way. The movie, a new movie came out about the 2 Jews who survived Helmno. Mm-hmm. And the death camp Helmno, the first death camp that the Nazis created in 1941, they used carbon monoxide poisoning. They drove around trucks, okay? Yeah. And out of more than close to 300,000 Jews were killed that way in this death camp. Yeah. And as far as we know, only 3 Jews survived hell no. There were others who tried to escape, of course. These two escaped, enough in time. Only one we know that actually lived through the end of the war, and he told the story to Claude Lanzmann. Was at the Eichmann trial. Was on the trial at Helmno. A very fellow who lost his wife and 2 children in the graves there. But he was selected for 2 weeks. He served as Sonderkommando to bury the bodies, and he and another fellow escaped together. And enough to tell the world, to write it down, to get to the Warsaw Ghetto underground, and to have it written down, part of the Oneg Shabbat writing of the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto, to say here is actual evidence of somebody who can tell you what happened at Helmno camp, what they were doing it, how they did it, etc. And this Swedish fellow went over, took this information from Poland to Great Britain and told the story. And that's when it first came out of these death camps, evidence of death camps, of real death camps, of somebody who was there and saw eyewitness reports.
And not much was done about it afterwards, right?
The Swedes didn't even want to talk about these guys who they smuggled them out of Poland because a long story. But what's amazing is that did anything happen? And most of the Jews were killed after that. They knew about death camps by June of 1942, and most of the Jews were killed in 43 and 44. This was just the beginning, and they knew, and they knew, and they knew, and Jews knew, and non-Jews knew. And what is incredible is that people can't believe. They say there was when Jan Karski, another famous righteous Gentile, came from Poland underground and came in front of Congress and said they're murdering the Jews of Europe. And he went to the one Jewish Supreme Court judge, Louis Brandeis. And Louis Brandeis says to him, young man, I know you're telling the truth, but I can't believe you. It was too unbelievable to think about. And therefore, they sat outside these camps and did not bomb them, did not liberate them, did not they, meaning us, the Americans, the British, Russians, others that fought against Nazism.
They didn't see the trains coming in and out?
Oh, they saw, but if they did it, they would turn it into a Jewish war. They don't want anything to, it's not about the Jews, it's about defeating the expanding Nazi regime, the Third Reich. And so we went off course, but I'm interested in asking the questions, the hard questions of where did people make decisions all along the way and they tried to live with them.
To be a good,
and who are the people who decided not to? Because every point is, I would say that maybe the central focus of my life is a real study of choice, of the choices people make and the freedom to make that choice, to realize that they really are free in their autonomy as a being. And again, this is why I think it's so compelling to have a conversation with somebody in psychology, is to really make people feel free that their choices to stay or go, to do or not do, to get up in the day, what they're going to do with their day, how they're going to do it, their relationship in this work that I do is why did they make the choices they did, and did they recognize they could have made other choices? Or when they did make these choices, most of the people, when you ask righteous Gentiles, for example, which I spend a lot of time in my work doing, either asking them or doing the research around people who ask them, why did you save a Jew? And the question was, how could I not? It was such a real, it's sort of like, and then you say, well, explain, what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean, how could I not? What does that mean? It means, how could I live with myself?
Their conscience spoke.
Exactly. They had a real sense of self. They had a real sense, and almost all, you might be interested to know, that when there were studies done about Dutch, Belgian, and French rescuers, there was a study done and looked at, and they wanted to see if there anything in common. What would make the kind of person be what they called an altruistic personality? A person who would give of themselves and not give to and sacrifice themselves and know that they're at risk and take high risk for somebody else who they either didn't know or whatever, but they knew that person needed their help. And the righteous Gentiles that were interviewed, all of them said, how could I not, at some level or not? And then you say, well, what does that mean exactly? What does it mean, how could I not? and they would come back and then they would research them, and the first thing they discovered, all these people had a high sense of self-esteem and self-respect.
Yeah.
And it sounds funny. Why would you risk your life if you like yourself?
I see another aspect too, and that is the element of fear. When you said we live in a free world, you make your freedom of choice. I see so often that people are not taking the freedom to make those choices, whatever it is, like changing your life or changing a job. There's always that fear. The more fear you have, the more that is blocked. And if I look at Holland, the Germans were very, very good at fear mongering. I mean, if they caught you that you were hiding Jews, your house was burned down, your farm or whatever, they were very, very, very fear mongering, and that works. Then people that are fearful a little bit and maybe insecure or not, but it is also very hard if you're a parent and you have little kids to take such risks that your kids will be murdered, or this is hard. So the fear is also an element in that. And then people are in the free world that they do not have to be fear. If you don't change your thinking, you still can be fearful of everything. I see that a lot of people that went or came from countries where they went through atrocities, they moved to the free world. They need to change their thinking, otherwise you still see behind every tree a bear, because that's for generations in your system. If you come from that, like for Jews, you can see that often, in Europe at least. That people are so afraid for things because that's the way of thinking for all those centuries. Now you're free, you need to do active work to lose your fears and to challenge your fears. And those people that you mentioned were strong personalities too. They were courageous and they had motivation in their heart, I think, to say it like that, their conscience. I cannot live with if I wouldn't have done that. And a lot of people live that guilt today, if they are still alive, and then many of them, go into the feelings of feeling guilty and blame the victims because Jews must have done certain things in order to be treated so badly.
I never go there. I never go there.
No, but it is what people think and say. So I
never repeat the kinds of things that people say. I never repeat it. Because I find it a way, as soon as it's out there, you even have raised that language to some kind of attention that does not deserve. I don't repeat. I'm being very, very honest about our conversations.
Yeah.
I believe that, and I'm hoping that your audiences, the other Goldie girls and people who watch this, would understand that we don't repeat unacceptable language or behavior that other people hold. Even we say there is unacceptable behavior and anger. We're going to focus on what do people need to do, or what can we do, or what have I found to be effective, or what I've discovered. Because I don't ever repeat a hateful word or a hateful idea. I don't care who even says it, a Jew or a non-Jew. I mean, it's not about all Jews are good or all Jews.
Because you feed it.
And it's not just, it's feeding it, it's giving it credence, it's giving it a kind of level as if it deserves attention. I only want to repeat if I only have a selective, if we only have the freedom if we only wake up and we have a 24-hour day, I'm going to put out there not just positive thoughts, but ideas that I want to see replicated. I don't want to waste time on ideas that have been thrown out there that are useless or worthless or even harmful.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to do that. So the language I'm going to use every time is who are the people that I have noticed, or actions that are possible, or you use the word courageous. Now, courage is not the absence of fear. And in fact, Mark Twain said, courage is not an absence of fear. It is a conquering of fear. Yeah. And because I don't expect people, and I didn't expect any of these people to be Supermen. Supermen, you're not fearful because the bullets bounce off of you. We know the bullets can hit you. We know that it will affect our children, affect our behavior, affect our livelihood, and we do it anyway. And the idea is, what kind of human being do I want to go through life? What's the significance and purpose of my personal life when I have the opportunity? So in the stories that I like to tell are like the German writer Ursula Hegge wrote a book, Stones from the River, where a woman and her father were at home in a cold night in Germany, and there's a knock on the door, and there's a young family of Jews, of husband, wife, child, that's saying, can we just sleep here in your barn or something? We're on our way. We're not even going to stay for very long. We're on our way, to safety in Switzerland, whatever. Can we just stay here? Do you have a piece of bread for us? We're cold. And they right away slammed the door in their face.
Yeah.
Day after day after day, the father and the daughter, from then on, said, maybe there'll be another knock at the door. Maybe we're ready with a piece of bread and a blanket. And there never was another knock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that incredible little story, fable, that you only have one chance to open the door to something really important,
yeah,
or your immediate gut reaction and your fear and your, and you're disowned and you're rattled, that you shut the door.
Mm-hmm.
What does it take to open the door and say yes?
Mm-hmm.
What does it take to say, what can I do for you? What does it take to be able to think something through and not shut the door immediately? Let fear conquer you. And this moment that you can wait, you keep waiting for your opportunity. And then you say, wait a minute. You don't think that she could have gone out and kept driving around and looked for people that are hiding in there that might have been told by, don't go to that home, it's not a good home?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't there a way that you could have been even proactive? Not only are you waiting to just do the right thing, but you can also be proactive to do the right thing.
Yeah.
That also takes another level. So it's interesting when I used to spend more time with young people and children, I could work with even to the level of kindergartners, and most of these lessons can be taught.
Mm-hmm.
Lessons on how to open your home and heart to others,
yeah.
how to be able to be courageous, how to not let hate,
compassion,
how to be compassionate, and do it at the price of everybody else saying something different.
Yeah.
What's it like to stand up? And I think it's really quite extraordinary that is possible.
The human capacity to do that. I would like to go back what you said before about not repeating hateful remarks, which I think is great because it doesn't grow. But I come also from another approach that I want to debunk things. If people have thoughts that I have seen many times, of course, in my work, thoughts that are maybe inherited thoughts, prejudice, whatever. If you say we don't talk about it, it does not get debunked, it does not get addressed, it cannot disappear because it is in the way too. And I think that is also the education that you can have at any age. Do you want to be in the choice? Do you want to be the good person or do you want to do this? What makes you choose that? If you have a belief, hold a belief about a certain group of people, that is, things need also to be challenged to get, like the line needs to be taken out. That's what I try to, that makes the motivation also stronger.
Well, and I don't disagree with that. What I agree, what I would like to propose or suggest is do it totally differently. Mm-hmm. Not by repeating what they said to then debunk it and make it a you versus me or this idea versus...
No, but that's not how I mean it.
No, I know you don't mean it, but...
I'm describing a phenomenon that exists in Europe and that I have faced many times and spoken about, and that gives people also the awareness because nobody likes to feel guilty. So you try to get rid of your guilt and you change the story. Cognitive dissonance, right? Is very important because I've seen so much coming out of that.
I'm using the line, I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm talking about is, and again, you're working out of Europe. I'm working mostly at this point because I live in North America, in North American environment, which doesn't have, very different, I do want to say.
Totally.
So I do want to be sure that when you speak and you're speaking about a European environment, we have to speak about what does the European environment need or not need about debunking. Here it's not debunking. They don't know anything.
There's nothing,
they're not debunking anything because they don't have anything. So if they are assaulted with new information, like the Jew, some Orthodox Jews say X and Y, or this, what you're doing is, that's the new information, and that's more interesting or sexy than the one that's really true, which is that most of us don't know what the hell is going on in this world, and most of us just take whatever prejudice we have to lay over what we see going on, and we are not working from a point of knowledge or information or solid evidence to make the decision. So don't introduce things that they don't even have.
No, but I was busy. I was thinking about Europe, what I face.
And I do want to say that Americans are notoriously, both from the education system, from what we get in formal education, but even informally educated, it's cherry picking out of history that is very bizarre. And it's repetitive and uninteresting. And I do want you to know that it doesn't really, it's anti-Semitic if we're going back into the anti-Jewish piece, it's anti-Semitic in a way that is already third or fourth generation, so it's diluted. They don't know where it comes from. They just feel that way.
Yeah.
But most of it is economic based than other things, religious and other such things. But even those are there. It depends where they're from. So it's a different kind. It's not as immediate. It also isn't as guilty because American non-Jews don't feel the responsibility for the Holocaust the way, or the guilt, I should say, for the Holocaust the way the European Jews, the European non-Jews do, because the European non-Jews have to say, well, where was I? Where's my father? Where was my grandfather? My grandfather fought on this side, my grandfather that way, my neighbors.
Yeah.
So they're dealing with all that guilt that American Jews say, oh, we beat those Nazis.
Yeah.
Even if we then say, wait a minute, most Americans didn't want to go to that war and almost were sort of tricked into going to that war with Pearl Harbor, and made it more about the anti-Japs for a long time. Forgive me, anti-Japanese, as they said it, anti-Japs the way they called it. Then it was the Yellow Peril. Then really about the Germans. In fact, so it's the American story in 1933. Till 39, and then all the way till 41 that's not our war. We're not fighting it. It's not interesting. It's different than the European story, which is that our brothers and fathers and everybody fought on the German side or capitulated when they came in.
It wasn't our war either, but they had to fight it.
Yeah. Well, but I think anyway. But I think that we have a lot to discuss about the difference between not between, but the overlap that we have between the individual psychological needs of fear and compassion and kindness and courage and many things that we have in this government that I want to elevate to how do we overlay that in history, and when we do it in a political sphere, when we do it in a religious sphere, when we do it as a moral imperative for each and every community to think about, and how does that community identify itself? If we not only it's not just a matter of debunking, it's what are we going to put in its place? What is the narrative we want to put in its place? So,
clearing the space for the good to come in a way.
Yeah. Or, like I said, with the American, North American approach, is that they really have nothing to build off of or understanding. It's a very large thing, the Nazis bad, Americans good, that kind of thing, or this and that. But they don't have the details or the layers that European experience has. So in the American one, and even American Jewish one, they have very few ideas. They just don't think about these things. And if you don't think, then you're not ready to respond. Like I said, when do you respond if you're not thinking about how can I be a courageous person? I can be an upstanding person. They call them upstanders in some of the Holocaust education, not just a bystander, but an upstander. And I think that that's really where I'd love to talk to you about in the future, about where some of the incredible discoveries I've had, some of the ways we applied it, and what places that it was effective, so that we can go forward.
Yeah, so much is related to this topic, right?
Yes.
Because I was really wanting to hear also more about your interfaith activities, and you have been teaching in so many countries. You've been participating in so many projects. It's like so much, but it is amazing that people like you take those steps and you do your big share to make things better and knowledgeable. That's very important. Well, I thank you so very much for being here.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, we continue this, and
a lot of this also ultimately can be applied to conflict resolution.
Yeah,
I want you to know.
Yeah,
a lot of the work on conflict, individual conflict, is very interesting. People say, why do they, and look at how individuals work in the destruction of a household or a home. It's the same thing as a community or a country can destroy the same way, because it's made up of individuals that have those same emotions playing and those same issues playing. So that's how we ultimately integrate that into Jewish-Christian relations, Jewish-Muslims relations on the outside world. It has to be, because it is disintegration of relationships, and I would like to build relationships and build strengths and build a possibility for a future that there's many more people that would say no to a Hitler or to any other Pol Pot or to all these other horrible leaders that they find so enticing and acceptable and in the most visceral way. I really believe we can do that, and that's the work that I've been working on.
Wonderful, yeah. To me comes to mind raising generations indeed that learn compassion and come from that, yeah. And then a lot need to change to create that, I would say, because you and I don't like the competition. The school system is totally based on competition, non-stop. If you start to think about it, it's very contradictory. But that's something for another time.
Okay.
Thank you so very much, and it's such a pleasure to have you here, Racelle.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Really great pleasure. You and to the listeners and to your friends, you've really taken a great initiative for people to have opportunity to be in the room with us at this time.
Absolutely, and people like you make it happen.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so
much. If we do future conversations, we can invite people in to ask questions from here on.
Yeah, we could do a live. That's another thing. Thank you so very much, and I stop it here.